In Humankind today, I'd like to discuss 5 things I wish I knew before I started playing. Here they are on screen now. I'm going to provide some tips and tricks and strategies along the way, and I would encourage you to let me know in the comments things that you wish you knew. Not just for my benefit, but for everyone's benefit. Collectively, we can hive mind and learn a lot of great things. There will be time cards below if you want to bounce around. Let's jump in and talk Golden Era stars, first of all. So at the moment I have no era stars, I've just moved through as the Australians, and you can see that innately my builder star, because I'm an industrial culture, is rewarding me with more fame. At the moment it's just plus 10%, but watch how it scales. So now that I've moved through a little bit, you can see how the fame calculations have changed. All of a sudden, these basic ones are no longer rewarding me quite as much, but take a look at how much my golden builder star is worth. Basically, 300 fame. These stars, and particularly your specific affinity, so if you're industrial, it's a builder star, agrarian, so on and so forth, it's the food ones. Either way, if you build up these stars, you will work your way towards winning the game so much faster, and honestly, the more I play Humankind, the more I realize it's actually worth hanging around in an era for a bit longer, unless you desperately need a culture. And especially on higher difficulties, where you don't always get to choose, it can be worth sticking about to pick up these extra stars, particularly if you're only a few turns away from getting them. I think also when you're transcending through the eras, it's particularly important that you focus on your cultural affinity, right? So it's very easy to go, more details, okay, what's my trait? This is staying with me. What's my district? Yep, I like that. Unit, looks good. What we often forget to do is look at this. What affinity action am I getting? What's my affinity bonus? If I play a scientific culture, I can research 2 eras forward. So that's much better. Equally, that affinity action, right? So do bear that in mind. This is almost just as important, not just for the actions, but for where you're getting that extra fame from, too. So before I started playing Humankind, I came from Civilization and lots of other strategy games, to be fair, but predominantly I was spending most of my time playing Civ, and now I spend a lot of my time playing Humankind. The two will likely bounce back and forth, but that's not the point. The point is, one thing that I wish I knew from the beginning was the importance not just of all of these era stars, right? They all reward fame, and fame is the victory metric in Humankind. But in particular, I wish I'd paid more attention across all 7 categories, regardless of which category I was. So something I was guilty of, for example, was if I was playing an industrial culture like the Egyptians, I would focus purely on those builder stars, and the rest I wouldn't really bother about. The one most important one that I think if you're anything like me, you're probably neglecting as well, are these military stars. Literally, you just need to destroy military units. And I know, it's like, oh, well, I don't want to go to war, like I can't be bothered, it doesn't count animals, I don't want to build up an army, blah blah blah. These stars are generally worth pursuing in every era, and you don't have to declare war to do it. There are, of course, lots of ways to go about it. First and foremost, if you can find some independent peoples, like these ones, instead of winning them over, you can choose to fight them. They will routinely pump out units, and you can routinely destroy them for era stars, fame, and ultimately victory. You can, of course, also skirmish in territories that have been unclaimed, and if you're playing as an expansionist, you can walk through claimed territories to get to other ones. Something to bear in mind. But take a look here, right? I've trained 2 warriors. Really, not a big deal. As the Egyptians, I'm pretty sure it literally only took me a turn. And now I can run up here during this era while I'm focusing on building my wonderful pyramids and my industry and getting all those other stars, and just do a bit of skirmishing around the sides. Really, seriously, I would encourage it. The other strategy, which I would encourage slightly less, but you can pursue it if you want, is to drop your cities to 0 stability, and then rebels will spawn. Rebels act like independent units, just like these ones that I'm fighting here. Rebels will spawn in your city if it's low stability, and you can fight them just like I'm farming these units. But by and large here, I want the takeaway for you to be that declaring war isn't the end of the world. You can always end the war by paying some reparations in gold. But if you don't want to do that, do still focus on your military stars. Maybe there's a weak AI you can bully. Maybe you want to fight independent people. Maybe you end up putting your cities into revolt mode, less than 30 stability when they become mutinous, and rebels will spawn and you can fight them. Ultimately, it's up to you and not for me to decide, but it is really important for me to note that these military stars are not really that hard to get, right? I literally just killed 2 units and I'm 2/3 of the way towards my first one, which will give me 100 fame, and I only have 700 at the moment, so that's very, very good. I mean, just look, this is a peaceful one, and they have 6 units, there goes 2 angry ones up there, and they're getting pop in the city as well. So if you besiege the city, you'll fight that pop too, in the form of its defending peasants. I mean, here's 7 military units I could slay immediately, with really little effort, just to show you how little effort it is to have a standing army. Look, 1 turn each. Archers, warriors. In 4 turns, I've got my standing army. I can wander over here and pick them off 2 at a time. These aggro ones here are actually pillaging my freaking territory. So not only is it useful to get era stars, but it's also incredibly useful just to protect my land. It always pays to have a standing army, and the military stars are some of the easiest ones to get, not because warfare is necessarily super easy, although if you manual resolve your battles, there's another tip, you'll probably find that it is. But the other thing, the other sort of added benefit is that really you can have a lot more control over when you get your military stars. You can find enemy units, you can find outposts or whatever, or even cause rebels and actually hunt them down, right? Whereas some of these other stars, you do sort of have to wait around a bit, right? If you're going for the aesthete stars, for example, and you haven't played an aesthete culture, you're going to be waiting a heck of a long time to get that influence. But the military stars, you have much more control over. I really, really deeply wish somebody had told me about these abilities over on the left-hand side. Every culture has one. The industry culture and the scientific culture ones are the best, though. In case of industry, it turns all money and science in a city into industry. In the case of the scientific ability, it does the same, but it turns everything into science. These abilities are so incredibly strong. Take a look here on my capital. Watch what happens when I activate this builder ability. Watch these yields. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Boom. My industry over quadrupled. And all of a sudden, these districts are taking no time at all. These abilities are just so incredibly powerful, right? Like, they are just so strong. The industrial ones and the scientific ones, as I say, tend to be the best, but every type of era star and every type of culture has its own one. The merchant, the aesthete ones, not quite as good. Expansionist one is really useful. Steal territories for free from the opponent, providing you have a military force on top of them. The agrarian ones lets you steal population, tends to be not as good. Military one lets you summon some units, kind of fun. And when you get yourself into the late game and maybe you end up with cities that you're not quite sure what to do with, you don't have any wonders to build, maybe you don't need to train any units, you don't either have space for any more districts like me here, or maybe you don't have the stability to support them. That's where the power of infrastructure comes in. But I argue, actually, it's more important in the very early game. So let me show you that now. Flash to the beginning of a game, and to be honest, this is kind of a topic I'd like to cover in a completely separate video, but it really does need to be mentioned here. The first decisions that you make when you're settling a city in Humankind are pretty significant. But one thing that I'd like to draw to your attention in particular is that early game infrastructure. So let me get Memphis set up a bit, and we'll talk infrastructures. There are actually 2 considerations. Firstly, there's the classic, do I build the pottery workshop, or do I build my unique district? As a general rule of thumb, if your unique district is providing you with some influence, or if you have another way of getting it, it can be better to get the district first. But again, that's an entirely separate can of fish for another video. Yes, a can of fish is now a saying. So here I am, I've quickly established a nice little city in my Egyptian empire, and I want to show you these early game infrastructures. Sorry if you've heard me talk about them before, but they really do matter, not only because of what they do, but because of sort of when and how you might want to use them. So there are some tips and strategies here too. The 2 most important ones for me are unlocked with domestication, that's animal barns, and then once you unlock copper, you get this one here, the forge. Both of them do the same thing, but for different yields. The forge rewards +5 industry per copper, and +1 industry on maker's quarters adjacent to others, plus an innate buff to all of your maker's quarters. And then this first infrastructure for food, the animal barns does the same, but with farmers' quarters and horses. +5 food from them, and +1 overall. These infrastructures are very, very, very strong, and let me show you here in this little case study. So, at the moment I only have 1 horse and 1 copper. More on that in a minute. But let me queue up both of these infrastructures. We'll start with animal barns, and we'll follow with the forge. In fact, I'll just put them ahead of this pyramid, just so you can see exactly what happens, so I can get them both in the same turn, right? First and foremost, I'll buy animal barns. Now, I have no farmer's quarters at the moment, but I'll buy it. And my food goes up by 5, because I have 1 horse in the empire. And with the forge completing at the turnover of that turn, you can see a big buff to my industry as well. It's particularly useful, of course, because I'm playing as the Egyptians. So now all of my makers' quarters, as you can see, are receiving a little bit more industry. +5 from the forge, and then some overall as well, +1. But there's actually another layer to this. If you open up your trade treaties and get the Trade Everything Treaty with your very kind neighbours, you can actually buy their horses for 33 gold, buy their copper as well. Now that I've bought those horses, you can see I have 2 in my empire. And indeed, the benefits from the early infrastructure stack with traded strategic resources as well. Now you can see in the city of Memphis, I'm getting +10 from animal barns because I have 2 horses, and 2 times 5 is 10. This is nearly infinitely scalable based on how many strategic resources are in the map. So do hoover them up and do pay careful attention to any infrastructure that combos with strategic resources, not only because it's a great way to get these early game yields like food and industry, but of course, infrastructure doesn't cost you any stability. Take a look here with these stoneworks. It's an innate buff to all of my tiles, basically, that are producing industry, and unlike the Maker's Quarter, it doesn't cost me -10 stability. The last thing I want to talk about is this: humankind's soft power mechanics. So unlike food and industry, and science, and gold, these mechanics are a little bit less obvious. It's faith and influence. So faith is the first one. It pops up, bam, you get your religion. Cool. Which one do I want? 5 on cities, obviously. Cool, hoover that up. Influence up in the top left. How do you gain these? What's the best way to gain them, and why are they important? I'm going to break it all down for you in less than 2 minutes, because I know that some of you will know this already, but I guarantee you there'll be little bits and bobs that you don't quite have a grasp of. So, let me take you through. The first, what I call soft power mechanic, is faith. You found your religion, you build your holy sites, and you generate faith using either your religious tenets, or many cultures also have unique districts that provide faith. For example, you can see here, I'm building, if I just cancel that, right, I'm building the Morians one, which provides some science and faith. Now, I understand that these resources aren't as sexy, right? You can't use your faith to build or buy anything in Humankind. And influence, while it's used to enact civics and attach territories, is also less upfront and obvious as to actually how useful it is. These holy sites are super duper useful in the early game because they provide us with some really important stability and faith. Stability will let you build more districts, and faith generates those crucial followers. So as you can see here, my religion has popped out. There are clearly other religions at play. And as I build up my faith and build followers, my population will convert to followers. You can see here I have 3 pop, and as my religion takes hold and boots out those previous customs we were following, I'll get those followers. Using things like trade routes and treaties, your religion will spread easier across the world. Once a religion has spread, it's very hard to remove it unless you really focus in on your own faith generation. In essence, the person with the greatest faith generation wins the religious game, and the religious tenets are incredibly powerful. Don't overlook religion in Humankind because it feels a bit basic, right? These tenets are super duper strong. +2 food on coastal water and lake tiles. +2 industry on forest and woodlands. And these are just the first tenets. There are 4 layers throughout religion. Don't sleep on it. The other soft power mechanic is up the top right here. It's influence. You can see here I'm getting 22 from districts and 5 from Mount Roraima and 4 from Guiding Light, right? We generate influence, we use influence to build our civics and to connect our territories, right? So here's a territory, I can click attach and it'll merge it into Memphis. Of course, before I do that, I just want to check in case there's anything else to do. You'll also note that influence is used to build cities. So when you're moving through and choosing cultures and choosing what to do not neglect your influence. The final point, of course, to note on spending it is that you do use it to buy civics, and civics are incredibly strong. I would always recommend you pick up minus 50% create outpost cost if you can get that quickly. You will save infinite influence on that while you're expanding around the world. The final interaction to note here, and one that I'm not doing a particularly good job about, is stability. When your city is above 90% stability, you'll generate 2 influence per person. When it drops into that middle category, 30 to 90, you'll generate 1 influence per person, that's population. And when you're below 30% stability, you will generate no influence. So stability is key as well, another soft power mechanic to help you govern a mighty empire. And that concludes this video. Thank you very much for watching, and as I say, do use the comment section below to share information with your fellow humankind, brothers, sisters, and everyone in between. It's an important thing that we can do, and we might as well use this platform to create some good and hive mind with each other. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.